Welcome to Think Free with Stephen,
And Daniel.
two brothers breaking down ideas and ways of thinking about this thing we call life. Unlock your mind to explore more than you ever thought possible. Think Free. Welcome back, Daniel.
Hey, thanks.
Glad to have you over again.
Yeah, it's nice. I am enjoying this new chair.
Yeah, we decided to switch things up a little bit this time to see if we could make our mics pick up the sound that we want to. So
Yeah, we're digging it.
we're just thinking free here.
All right,
Just
perfect.
Getting outside the box. All right, so let's talk a little bit about legacy and what we leave and how we make a difference in this life, which is, I think, something that we're all in tune with one way or the other, whether we admit it or not. And it seems to be this is something that we get a little bit more conscious of the older we get in life. Looking back at being a kid and a teenager, and this wasn't really anywhere in my mind, although I think it was subconsciously, it just wasn't a big part of how I made decisions or what I thought about. It also ties in with this idea of immortality, that everybody seems to have an inclination that they want to outlive themselves or they want to outlive their biological life. And obviously the most obvious way we see that is in an afterlife, with religions promoting that as a big reason to sign up. And
Oh, interesting. So afterlife having to do with people's innate desire to have immortality, and that's one way to do it.
to be immortal, right. I think what I'm proposing is that there is a built-in desire to live forever in some capacity. Yes, and so an afterlife is the religion's way to satiate that need or that desire, or it taps into that desire and leverages it to earn followers. It's easy in the West for us Americans and modern people to make fun of Middle Eastern religions that promise 70 virgins, for instance, if you go out the right way. And the Latter-day Saints promise that you get your own planet and have lots of wives. And of course, mainstream Christianity has promised for a long time that you get to reign forever in heaven with Jesus and God. And so I remember as a child feeling secure in that. So I guess it has gone back further than adulthood. Feeling secure in the fact, because both of us were raised in religious family.
Would you say you were feeling secure in that for the sense of that you would be immortal, or that you didn't get quote unquote left behind when your family went?
Probably both. That death wasn't the end.
Okay.
How about for you? How would you answer that question?
I would say mine, I was constantly terrified that the rapture had either happened, like when I couldn't find mom or dad, or couldn't get a hold of them, or they weren't where they were expected. So I was, not only that it had happened, but it happens in the future and I don't get taken up.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I think I felt more security with that mentality than feeling excited for going to heaven and anything else that would come along with that.
Wow. So yeah, I'm framing this a little bit differently for both of us. So for you, heaven represented a we space continuation where you were going to be secure with the people that you loved and loved you.
Yeah, and that would really help my 6.
Yeah, for sure.
The Enneagram
yes,
6.
Your Enneagram 6 would like that.
Yes.
That security.
Yeah.
Yeah. The people you respect, the authority figures in your life, they're all going to be there. So you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Yeah.
But then to have your entire support system be gone in a poof of an instant, and then you're the only one left from your support system, would be like an ultimate fear.
Right. It's terrorizing.
Yeah.
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 And it sounds like you could probably even think of some times when you felt that, like,
oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It was deep.
Yeah. So being lost at Kmart, is this like laying in bed at night, just like, dang, I hope I don't wake up and everybody's gone?
No, not, definitely if like lost at Kmart, but even, like before cell phones, mom, maybe me leaving me home by myself and her going somewhere. She didn't do anything wrong, but her going somewhere, and maybe my expectation of when I was supposed to hear from her, or she was supposed to be home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your mind would jump to the worst case, which was you're all alone in the world.
Yes. Yes. which when you get brought up within a specific, I would think, religion and
Right.
specifically Christianity, would only happen when the rapture comes, and then you're left behind and you're the only one there.
Yeah.
And so I know some people that we both know that would say that they were traumatized by reading and watching the series Left Behind. And I never connected the two, and it's, for me, it's completely separate. So I think it's just has to do with that Enneagram 6, I think, for me, for the support. And so when like I would watch that movie, the first movie of Left Behind, I was like, yeah, that'd be awful. This is exactly my nightmare.
Yes. Science fiction that isn't so fiction.
Yeah.
And for those who might be listening that don't know the ins and outs of this, part of what's so fearful is that you never knew when it was going to happen. It was the thief in the night was the phrase that was borrowed from scripture, which was like, at any point Jesus is going to come back, and all the people who figured out the right formula are going to disappear, and all the people who didn't are SOL.
Yes.
And so you live with this constant
and then
pressure.
it's like the worst case scenario for the
Right.
next X amount of years on Earth here for those people.
literal hell on earth.
Yeah.
For those who missed their chance.
It's not like we just keep on going about our days and doing things that's supposedly much worse.
Yes. On top of the fact that you've just lost your
Yes.
entire support system.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and the sense of too, of on top of losing the support system, it's like the clearest sign that you effed up. Like you did something, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, like
Right.
everybody else did, to be able to get raptured up.
Yeah. So you're a failure on top of you've lost everything.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that could be a pretty powerful incentive to maintain your status in the religious structure.
Yes.
That was something that was the water you swam in from birth. Neither of us really had an option as a child to do anything but be a part of that, which most is true for a lot of children. It's not anything unique there.
Right.
Even if you're outside of religion, generally you don't have much of an option. It's just what was handed to you by your parents, right? Wow, that's a big deal. It's really helpful clarification, especially contrasting with my own experience, which I think was much more eye space centered. It was more about what's going to happen to me as an individual, was more the focus than my community. Of course, I wanted my people to be there, but I don't think it had
was
the
like the
same
driving
pull.
force.
Yeah, it didn't have the same pull. It was just my ceasing to exist was the terror more than being without the people that I cared about, needed, and loved me and all that. So, yeah, it's really cool to hear your contrast to that. How did you find the courage to move beyond that?
So I would skip forward just a second and say it was some of the most freeing feeling and burden release that I've ever experienced, letting that go. Of course, I didn't know that when I probably first started down that path, but I do want to just emphasize that it is very surprising in a great way how freeing it was to not be bound by so much fear and guilt and shame, not having to constantly pray. Like, especially like in those moments too, like, oh my God, that's all I would be doing would be praying when I would be in that kind of that fear, that scared moment. And it wasn't just when I was 7 or 8 or 9. I mean, it was well into my teenage years that I was dealing with that. What was the question? Was it how or how I felt?
Where did you find the courage
Where did I
to
find
be
the
able to
courage?
move beyond it? Yeah. What were some of the things that gave you, because I would think for a lot of us, just being paralyzed by that terror would be a big hill to climb.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the first steps, or
I would say just some of your and I's path through all of this over the last probably 5 to 10 years of starting to look at it from a different perspective. And of course, the first handful of years, I hadn't changed my position on the religious standpoint at all.
right.
And it was starting to look at it a little bit of a different light, using some science, looking at history, looking at what were the intentions of the people that were living at the time that the Old Testament was written, what was really happening. And so I think it was a long process. It wasn't
Right.
something that just happened overnight. It was probably because each time that I learned or looked at something from a different perspective, started to learn and understand a little bit more, I think that was like literally like every single piece was a chipping off, or like an onion layer peeling away.
Yeah.
And so it was like each step was like, oh, it was a little bit more freeing. Oh, it's a little bit more freeing. Oh, it's a little bit more freeing, to not have to try to defend whether Jonah was actually in a belly of a fish for 3 days and got spit out. Like, not having to try to argue and defend how millions of species got onto the ark and all those different types of things for me. So as I was able to let go on having to defend those and being able to see it, that maybe it's a more of a tribal around the fire story, that really helped provide a lot of comfort to those people back in that time, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that it happened exactly that way.
Yeah.
And so I would say, to answer that, I would say that was probably some of the courage was from Molly, my wife, and then just kind of starting to read some books and really start unpacking from looking at it from a different perspective than just a closed-minded, read the Bible from front to back, and everything was 100% true.
Yeah. And so then eventually, as that all started to be questioned and some things let go of, then that eventually you came to a point where you'd say that terror of being left behind had nothing to cling to anymore. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. And I would say, now that I'm thinking about it too, I would say probably one of the first books that actually started the process was probably Rob Bell's Love Wins. That shifted my perception of God and heaven and hell. And so as that started to really appreciated how he dissected and went through and explained things and provided a lot of insight to this God that I am following, is by reading the Bible and looking at the context and looking at it from different perspectives, it's not so black and white of that you have to say this prayer and you're going to heaven versus and everybody else is just going to hell. It doesn't matter how good of a person they are. It doesn't matter what they do in the world. It doesn't matter where their heart is or their mind. If they didn't do this certain ritual, they're going to hell.
Yeah.
And so that probably started to break the fear of, oh my gosh, I'm going to get left behind and everybody's going to leave me, because it's like, and where I said earlier about that it says that you then failed and did something wrong. So now going through the Love Wins book from Rod Bell to see, oh, it's, even if I believe all of this about Christianity, it's still not, I'm not going to get missed. I'm not going to, just because I messed up on something. And so then I think that started to help me be okay with breaking down other barriers along Christianity.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. And so you don't carry that fear or terror anymore, it sounds like.
Not at all. Not at all. No, yeah.
Yeah.
What about for you? Do you think that your eye space of wanting to
persist
has persisted through your path?
Yeah, well, I noticed for me when I lost heaven, that's one way I put it, lost the belief in heaven as a place that you go to continue forever and ever and never have to see a full death. The body can die, the soul lives on for eternity. I lost heaven. There was a huge void. I don't think I felt a lot of terror like you did on that side of it as a child or even as a young adult. Facing the fear of it, I was always pretty confident that if anybody was getting it, I was one of them. It started for me, though, the terror set in once I lost heaven or let go of heaven, and I could no longer believe in it, even if I wanted to. It was just going to be for very similar reasons to what you described, for so many of the things that had underpinned how I got there. Once they all fell apart, it just kind of crumbles like a house of cards. So anyway, when I found myself in a spot where I didn't have heaven anymore to hold on to, there's a terror that set in, and it's just like, wait, this is all there is. There's no afterlife. There's no you just get this one chance, and it could last for a year, it could last for a minute, it could last for 10 years, 100 years. There's no.
If I may jump in real quick,
Yeah.
did the feeling that you had as the result of losing heaven, was it difficult getting to that point? Like, did you start feeling and sensing like, oh, if I go down this path and this is going to be me losing it, and that's going to have those types of feelings? Or did you not have any idea until you lost heaven?
I would say more the latter.
Okay.
I didn't really notice it creeping up. It wasn't something I expected or planned for. It was more just, you kind of wake up one day, metaphorically, and say, so many other things have fallen off. I can't hold on to this anymore either, and still be intellectually consistent.
So you weren't like working through the process of like,
No.
is it real? Is it not? It was more, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was almost like it was a casualty of war.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the war was on a different front for other concepts and models and ways of thinking about reality and God. And eventually there was just enough of those things disintegrated that heaven had to go too. It would just be a fairy tale now. I couldn't pin my hopes on a fairy tale anymore, which it hadn't been a fairy tale to me before.
Yeah.
But once I exchanged enough of those beliefs and concepts in other areas, then it would only be a fairy tale. And so that's when the terror set in. I found other things to hook onto that are similar since then. Borrowed an analogy about soap bubbles that were all much like soap bubbles in our existence on Earth. If you think about a tray that you might use with a child or anyone outside in summer, and you dip a wand into a tray of soap and you spin it around, and then these little soap bubbles appear for a brief second, float around, and they pop. And so I imagine our existence as humans, as tangible organic material, as being a little bit like the soap solution, and what's inside of the bubbles is the air, the atmosphere that's all around us, and that might be the spiritual or the intangible part of reality. And so when a soap bubble is created, there's a tiny bit of soap solution that encapsulates a bit of atmosphere, a bit of air for a brief moment, and then we have a definite object that we can point to and say there's a bubble, whereas before there wasn't. There was just a bunch of soap and a bunch of air. And then eventually, a second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds later, the soap bubble pops, the air goes back to being air, and if you have the tray underneath the bubble when it pops, the soap solution goes back into the tray. And then you can dip the wand in and you can spin around again and have a whole nother set of soap bubbles, some of which include probably some of the same air and some of the same solution of the previous round of bubbles. And you can do that 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, recycling the bubbles, recycling the air. But eventually the bubbles always pop, the air goes back to being the air. The bubbles never really existed, nor do they ever cease to exist. They just change their state. And so that was kind of been my working replacement for heaven, has been I as an individual, any of us, are a soap bubble for a brief second. We only exist in a way that we can point to for as long as the soap is surrounding a pocket of air, when that air could be representing spirit, and then our physical form, we're made of stardust and dinosaur piss or whatever. Like, we're just a compilation of everything that's come before, the carbon atoms that have been broken down into millions of other configurations now just happen to make up our body for a brief moment in time, and then they're going to be recycled back into something else. So when we die, we're a soap bubble popping. Our true essence gets integrated back into the ether, as it were, and we as an individual cease to exist, but who we really are deep down inside, our true essence, what we were before that soap bubble formed, continues on, because where could it go? It has to. And then this, like I said, the soap solution just gets repurposed and recycled into something else. So that to me was that concept, which is Eastern Buddhist. It's certainly nothing new, nothing I came up with. It just borrowed from a few other sources of people, kind of put it together to make sense in my own world. Because I don't know if that's real or not any more than anybody knows for sure if heaven is real or not. It's just a good working model to keep me sane, to keep me from the nihilism of complete chaos and irrelevant non-existence. So I think that's my current working theory for who or how we are. And which brings me back to my original point, which is this impulse to to survive, to go beyond. We started talking about heaven because that's a way that our soul can persist, our identity can persist, our tribe, our community, our support system can persist. And it seems to be a natural drive that I could trace back to just a simple biological imperative for cells to reproduce themselves, for our genetic makeup to make as many copies as possible. I've heard it said that when it comes to evolution, you win by reproducing your likeness, your genes, your cells as many times as you possibly can, which would correlate with mammals' drive for reproduction, which is another way that I think humans, especially modern humans, attain or strive for immortality is by having kids. And that was another thing that I think I've been finding out about myself lately is I want to live forever. I don't want to die.
You do?
I don't.
No, you do want to live forever?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do. Somehow, not in the heavenly sense anymore. But I feel a compulsion. I feel a push to have a legacy, to be immortal in some way.
Like to exist.
To exist.
Like you don't want to be like a vampire and live in this body as you are for the next ever.
Yeah, well, I think that might be like a very base expression of that. I don't personally want to. I think the impulse could be expressed in that way. So Another example could be having my consciousness uploaded to the cloud until technology advances in such a way that there can be an Android version of me that then my consciousness can be downloaded into. There's plenty of series and sci-fi movies about people existing in virtual reality after they die. There's movies about, how can we preserve our uniqueness in a augmented reality or some sort of form where we use robots to help us along. I think there's a word for that, kind of like RoboCop, but anyway. So there would be another expression of that desire, I think, not just unique to me. I think it's a human impulse to how do I persist beyond what my biological body can sustain.
I want to talk more about that because I disagree with you on that.
Oh, you do? Please.
Yeah.
Please say more.
Right now?
Sure.
Oh, okay. You had mentioned that at the beginning that kind of the same thing of it's inherent in everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, which before you had said that, I was thinking about it from my own perspective. And I was like, oh, I just got slapped in the face. Maybe I don't want to admit it. But I don't agree with that still.
Okay.
So I'd love to be shown how I'm not wanting to admit it, but it is something that I have thought about before about other people's desire to exist forever. And I truly, from looking at it from my own perspective, I don't have a desire to exist forever.
Okay.
I'm often reminded of like Ricky Gervais, where he famously talks many times about people saying, well, if you don't believe in an afterlife, you don't believe in any existing forever, why aren't you pillaging, raping, and killing people as much as you want? This says, I do pillage, kill, and rape people as much as I want, which is none. And for him, how he quotes it is that it's the joy of experiencing this that we have right now because of it being a finite amount of time, that's what makes it so special. And that really resonates with me because I think that most religions started trying to answer the question of why are we here and what are we doing here? And I think for a lot of people, so this is why I disagree, not everyone, but I feel a lot of people that if you just stopped existing, you can't answer that question. Why are we here? What are we doing? What's our purpose? It's just happened to be here on this chunk of rock because of evolution after millions and billions of years. And so it almost seems like it would be for you. So say for you, and I know other people too, a why is a really important thing to be resolved. And that's not an important thing. We've talked about that before. Right. It's not an important thing for me. And so I, especially since I deconstructed, have never had any issues with that, have never even thought through that of why are we here. And as part of the deconstruction of just kind of looking at, we're kind of just here, and it's just So for me, don't I don't find currently, and I don't think about and don't find value in thinking, why are we here? What's going to happen afterwards? For me, feel that I am completely satisfied with dying and going into the dirt and not existing anymore after that. And also, I've never been one as far as having a legacy. Like Malcolm Moore talks about, everybody says you die twice, once when you go into the grave, and the second time is the last time somebody says your name. That's not a priority for me. That's not something that drives me. It's not something that creates fear. The absence of that, of creating fear or concern or a lack of something. So
Yeah.
for me, I think for me, that's why I think that it's not just me being not honest with myself, but it's because I'm not having to really answer the question of why. And so once I kind of agree that, yeah, we're kind of here, we're just on this rock, even if we are kind of interconnected with the bubble analogy, yeah, I can totally get behind that and totally see that. It makes sense. I follow along. But that being true or wrong doesn't provide any value to me.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you sharing a different perspective. I think I relate to how all that impulse resonates in me, and then I see examples of it in the world, and I attach the two and say, oh, okay. Like you said, the why is important to me, finding out the motives. Part of what fuels me to even have these conversations or to make this podcast is to get behind and say, why is that person acting that way or speaking that way?
And I don't think I'm better or worse for not being motivated by the why, or that you're better or worse for being motivated by the why. It's just kind of from my perspective, facts of it.
Yeah. So I appreciate a different perspective. I appreciate that it may not mean the same to you as it does to me, at different value or just different priorities. Which is good to hear. I was going to say, well, let me see if I can convince you. And then you, and then you mentioned a few other things that I was going to bring up. So I was like, okay, maybe not. It was the legacy piece that you touched on, because I think I often put that in the same category as, if we don't put our hope in an afterlife like heaven or something like that, where our soul persists, I think the next best thing that we often do or substitute for that, or in place of or instead of, is we want to build something on this earth that's going to outlast us. That, again, could go back to, like I said, for me, could be our family. Our kids are going to persist. And so I've noticed in myself and in others, there's a lot of emphasis on building a family that's strong, that's solid, that has lots of grandkids. The grandkids are all doing well, that they're healthy, that they're vibrant, that they're contributing to society. And I've noticed a lot of people, and I even see this in myself, putting a lot of emphasis, a lot of value, a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of identity into making sure that they have a strong lineage of people that come after them.
Yeah, it sounds like it almost kind of goes hand in hand with our last episode of, they're almost motivated by that, maybe because that's the story that they tell themselves of who they are.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so then I kind of go a step back further and go, well, why would they want to attach their identity to what their kids are?
Yeah.
And then I go, oh, it's because that's a way to live forever.
Okay. Yeah.
You're not participating in it, which I think is a funny trick of evolution somehow. You're not really there to see it, but if there's a comfort that comes knowing that I'm going to live on in my kids and in my grandkids. And even the family name, for instance, how we all know how big of a deal that's been throughout history. And that, a woman takes her husband's name traditionally and joins that family. And so this family crests, and we see in movies and TV shows in older days, the family name was everything, because it persisted. It was the way for the patriarchs to live on, as one explanation for it, or one piece of the puzzle. And so kids could be that, or could be building a business. I know people that, instead of investing their identity, their time, their resources, their energy, their everything into a family, they put it into building a business. And a lot of times people name the business after themselves, which isn't good or bad. It just is another indicator that there's something about themselves that they want to persist when they're dead and gone. If the business lives on, whether it's a small town, mom and pop shop, or whether it grows to be a Fortune 500 traded on the stock exchange, I think that's a way that people can persist, at least in their own mind and in the minds of the people that are left behind.
Yeah. And then I would say adding on top of that is I could see why you'd have a big, not you, but that a person would have a big desire to have their children
Right.
run the business as well with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So especially if you see a business that says so-and-so and sons or something like that, which isn't to put it down or to say there's anything wrong with that. It's just an indicator of that impulse that I'm teasing out here in this conversation.
And I do want to point out that even though I was saying where I was coming from, my perspective, I do think though that there are the mass majority of people that are driven this way.
Okay.
And I would say agree too that I think like many things, it's because of evolution and where we've came from as a species. Because yeah, like absolutely, like you're talking about even with the patriarchy and last names, like thinking back to like tribal, like, you know, as your tribe starts out really small, it's mostly probably family,
right?
And you're growing that. And then you've got, you know, same thing with like the tribe leader or like a king and a lineage of a king. So there's this, very big, that's kind of almost, if you think back really far, that was the only identity of that you could even hang your hat on. Like that was it. Oh yeah, I'm so-and-so's son of so-and-so, you know, like that was your identity. So yeah, having a legacy, having an identity that lived on was kind of the ultimate expression of being successful and powerful. And I could see how that would persist and can continue through today.
Yeah. And find maybe a little bit different expressions.
Absolutely.
Having a foundation, for instance, that, you know, not only can do charitable work while you're alive, but can go on after your past and have a caretaker or custodian of that foundation, or naming hospital wing. I mean, nothing that you and I are probably ever going to do.
Yeah.
But for some people, I was puzzled a little bit, like, why would you name a hospital wing or a library after yourself? Like, that's a little odd. And if you want your name to live on and people to remember you, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. They're going to keep on saying your name.
Exactly. Exactly. So that could be another example of a place where you want your life to count for something that will go on when you aren't here anymore, to make that direct impact.
Do you use any of this information that you've gleaned or have sifted through to guide you in decision making on anything? Like, do you look at it, like when you think about to make a decision on something, look at it from a back perspective of like, what's your motivation? Why are you wanting to do this in relation to, is this just because I want to have a legacy or live on?
To some degree, yeah, that's part of it, is to be able to examine my own motivations, I think a little bit more accurately, give me another framework or a lens to assess decisions or motivations, or if my kids are doing things or making choices or behaving in a way or going down a path that I think doesn't build that legacy in the way that I want, and I find myself reacting to that, I can be more aware, more alert, more awake to the fact that, oh, this isn't just, oh, I love my kids and I don't want them to make bad decisions. It's also, this is going to reflect poorly on me. Well, why do I care if it reflects poorly on me? Because I don't want to stop existing in the world. And one of the ways that I think I can have some control over that is to somehow manipulate or craft the way that my kids represent how I raise them, or something like that. And so then I can get to a deeper source of what my resistance might be, a more awake, a more aware, a more conscious understanding of, this isn't about what I might classify as love, or I just care about their well-being. This is really a motivation that goes to something else.
And you specifically feel that the motivation to not have you look bad is attached to the legacy portion of it? Because I ask that because I would admit that I have that same struggle of child doing something and it reflecting poorly on me, yet I've never consciously connected that to a legacy of, Daniel wasn't a good father. For me, it has seemed like it's always just been in the moment. What are people thinking about right now about how I'm doing with it?
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily think that resistance always means you're focused on your legacy. I think it could be most likely just as much about the here and now, or maybe both.
Sure, but your experience.
I would say in my experience, it is both.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I would also say that I probably wouldn't have been able to notice that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm in my mid 40s now. So, as you hit different milestones in life, you start thinking about things from a different perspective, from a different angle. And that might have some impact on it for me as well. But certainly when I was younger, it was more about the immediate reaction, the immediate judgments that I was putting on myself, that of course I put on other parents when their kids behave that way. So I assumed other people were judging me.
Well, and probably just like what you were saying earlier, where you've thought about it more as you've gotten older and you didn't think about mortality earlier in your life. And the same thing with how it affects and then how you think about it. Like when the kids do that, you're thinking a lot more about death because it's coming up.
It's
like
closer.
when you're in your 20s and you're like, oh, the average life expectancy is 70s or 80s. But then, as you're starting to be like, oh, I'm in my mid 40s, that means I'm almost 50. Oh my gosh, that means it's only 20 years left.
Right.
If you lived a happy, normal life, you only have that much time left. So it's definitely, I think I would agree with you. Yeah, as you start to get older. So maybe I'll start having some more thoughts of that here in another 8 or 10 years.
Yeah, it could be just really a phase of life sort of concern. There's other things
It's
that
just
drop
not
off.
on your horizon.
Right.
Death is
Right.
not really on your horizon when you're in your 20s.
Absolutely. No, for most of us, it's not. And so we have other things that we're thinking about or asking why questions about, that
Right.
sort of thing. Yeah. So it informs my own self-analysis of the decisions that I make or the priorities that I make. It also, if I see somebody investing their time and energy and life resources into a project that I don't feel very concerned about, I'm not really interested in, it doesn't motivate me. For instance, building a business. It's not something I have a real strong drive to do, although I know people who do, and I respect them for that. And I can also say, okay, that's their version of not only building something that can take care of themselves and their family and provide a certain lifestyle and a service to the community and all the other motivations. And there's most likely a desire for them to have something that's going to outlive them, in the same way that I might want my kids to outlive me, or I might want to be attached to an idea that my true essence persists, if not in heaven, as a going back into the ether and reconstituted in another soap bubble, but not that exact same amount of air, but mixed in with somebody else's air, and then now a fully unique personification of that air is going to occur every time, or something like that. So so it's for my own understanding, but also for a framework for interpreting the actions and behaviors and motivations of others. At least part of it. Again, nobody just builds a business for their legacy. Nobody just has kids so they can live. There's always a complexity of motivations. And I just think that's a helpful piece to consider. And if it doesn't ring true for a person, that's totally fine. I wouldn't want to convince them otherwise. I'd also, like you said, say, well, maybe give it another 10 years and see if that changes.
Yeah.
Or if there's anything different.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, like just thinking while you're talking, like thinking of owners of companies, like you could see if they had that motivation to have the legacy specifically through their business, that a lot of them, like, spent 20, 30, 40 years
blood, sweat, and
tears. I could see how that could cause a real big rift in miscommunication and separation between a child and that parent if that child it does not have the same drive of that business, and that parent has then been building their entire life to culminate to have this business, and then to think, oh, it's just gonna go to somebody else, or it's just gonna cease to exist. Obviously, like you said, not everybody is having that motivation, but the people that do have that motivation, you then think about like, oh my gosh, can you imagine if their kids didn't want to take that over? Like, that would be hard.
It is. And I can tell you that because I've actually been facing that myself a little bit in the sense of not a business per se, but like say a family values standpoint. It almost feels like what you just described is a trick of evolution, if we're going to assume evolution for this conversation. A trick of evolution is that the primary generation, and that changes every generation. Just whatever is the current primary generation, I'll use myself as that, as a 40-something with teenagers and young adult kids. Primary generation builds a legacy, a foundation, a business, a family values, whatever it is, insert the thing. And the trick of the evolution is that the secondary generation, my kids, seem to be pre-programmed to want anything but that thing that I built. And it seems like the reason for that is so that growth happens, so that expansion happens, so diversity happens, so that there isn't just I build one business and then for the next 150 years, that's all my legacy does is run that business, and nobody goes out and explores new worlds and finds new innovations and builds a second business or changes up and buys a sports team or whatever. And obviously you can see when the world was a lot smaller and humanity was a lot more constricted, that would be an helpful urge for the kids to leave the tribe and go off and explore. And we see this all throughout history. It's one of the most common story tropes in movies and books is the hero's journey. They have to leave their home, go find themselves, go find their own purpose in the world. And more often than not, it tends to be much different than what mom and dad built and wanted. And so we kind of get tricked to think we're building this thing for our kids, for the next generation. It's a biological urge, just like we want to provide a safe home and we want to make sure they're fed and clothed and have a good education and opportunities and all those other things. And then once they start to individuate, establish their own identity, thanks, mom and dad, and I'm going to go do something else. And I see that more often than not. Of course, there's exceptions. But I'm also feeling a little bit of that in my own experience. And it's a bit of a rude awakening. And I think the more that a primary generation person can accept that, they're going to have probably a better relationship with their kids and maybe be able to move on and find something else to do with that thing that they built, rather than insist that it gets passed on to the kids who most likely don't want it.
Yeah.
And they don't want it simply because they want to find their own thing.
Right.
They want to build their own whatever, their own legacy. They don't want to just inherit what mom and dad did for them most of the time. And I think that's healthy. I think that moves the species forward and keeps us growing and innovating and expanding and all the things that we truly, really want. So you're absolutely right. Keyed in on that. Good for now?
I like it.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we hit on some fun stuff. Thanks for chatting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Till next time.
Till next time.